Right, we are starting the year staring into what looks like another storm, I'm afraid. The UK economy seems to be in trouble again. The world is a volatile place, needless to say, and a new Trump presidency could impact all of that in who knows what kind of ways. So, what does the future hold for us here in Scotland? And how do the people who run the country plan to help us through what could be potentially treacherous times? I'm pleased to say I have the country's leader with me here in the studio, First Minister John Swinney. Good morning to you.
Morning, Martin.
I'm not going to say Happy New Year because I think we should stop that after the first week of the year. Exactly.
We're well into 2025.
The sentiment's there. So let's look ahead to the year. Some pretty unsettling omens as we begin. Are you worried about this year? How worried should we be?
There are obviously a lot of storm clouds ahead for us, and you summed them up in your introduction. The economic outlook for the United Kingdom is troubling. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of international conflict in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and there is obviously the emergence of the Trump presidency, and that will bring with it what it brings, and none of us are that particularly clear about what that will involve. So there is a lot of uncertainty, but crucially, what we must do is look carefully at all of that information, at all of that situation, and make the wisest judgments we can about the future of Scotland.
And you have to make those decisions. And you seem to be doing it. I'm not going to betray too much of what we were discussing before we just came on air, with some enthusiasm. You seem to be enjoying the job. I say that because you've admitted to me in the past that you had to be given a bit of a shove in the back to take the job 8 months ago. And now here I am reading the Sunday Mail. I'll be in it to swin it. It seems we can't get rid of you. You're here till 2031 if you win the next election.
The thing for me, Martin, is that I felt I had a very long and very enjoyable but very demanding ministerial career. I came to the conclusion in 2023 that I'd done my bit and I should make way for others. Things have obviously got a bit difficult for my party and for the government. I had the benefit of a restful year after I stood down. I'd never quite understood. I'm now sort of explaining this as my sabbatical year. I didn't plan it like that, but that's what it's turned out to be. And it gave me a chance to rest, to reflect, to get a different perspective on how, on the issues that we face. And then when this situation suddenly emerged in 2024, and my party said to me, look, we need you to come in and to lead our party and to stand for First Minister, it's a prospect I wasn't planning for, but I'm relishing it. I'm loving being First Minister. I'm loving serving the people of Scotland.
Right, OK, and you're saying you're going to do the whole of the next term if you win the election. We have seen a bit of a change of focus from the Scottish Government since you took the job. Out have gone, or not necessarily out, but a lot of what some people would have referred to as the progressive policies, the socially progressive agenda, has been relegated somewhat in terms of its importance or significance. And you've focused on what you've described as policies that are important to real people. I say that because one of your significant predecessors seemed to send a pretty direct warning to you and Kate Forbes over that. Nicola Sturgeon, interview in the Financial Times yesterday. Here's what she said. I think care needs to be taken in moving the party away from the position from which it won 8 elections under me, and I can't remember how many under Alex Salmond. If you want to move it away from that, be careful you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that you've thought through the electoral consequences. That's a pretty barbed remark. She said that to a journalist. Has she said it to you?
What's important for me is that I'm focused very directly on the issues of concern to people in Scotland. So people in Scotland want us to get rid of child poverty, to eradicate child poverty. They want us to have a successful economy. They want us to be able to tackle the climate crisis that we face. They want us to improve our public services. That's what I'm focused on, and that's what my government's focused on. And if you take a concept such as eradicating child poverty, for me, there's nothing more socially progressive than eradicating child poverty, because it's so important that we create the best foundations for young people.
But what does she mean by this, though? Because she wanted to eradicate child poverty. What's she talking about here, do you think?
Well, what I think,
trans rights?
Well, what I think is important is that we concentrate on the issues that are going to deliver that progress for people in Scotland. That's what I'm about. I'm in politics to deliver progress for Scotland. And in every respect, I want to make sure I use every power available to me, every opportunity for influence, every way in which I deploy resources through the Scottish budget to deliver progress for Scotland. And that will underpin the ideas that I put forward. But crucially also, I want my party to be electorally successful. You've referred to the Sunday Mail headline where I say I want to lead us into the 2026 election, to win it and to serve that full parliamentary term. Now, to do that, I've got to have a broad electoral coalition behind me. And what I'm doing is broadening the electoral appeal of the SNP.
OK. I'm going to come on to a lot of that in a second. What she's saying is think through the electoral consequences of what you're doing. Directly to you, what do you say to her?
Well,
out?
Well, what I would say is that the SNP's got a broad electoral appeal, and it will continue to have a broad electoral appeal under my leadership. And because what I've the thing that's always struck me about the success of the SNP always wins when it's in the mainstream of Scottish public opinion. That's been the consistent point throughout all of our history since 2007. Before 2007, we weren't anchored in the mainstream of Scottish public opinion. We got there in 2007. Is that
what she did wrong?
Well, no, because we won lots of elections under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership.
Under Hamza Yousaf, who continued her progressive agenda. Is that where it went wrong?
All I'm saying...
Too much focus on trans rights, too much focus on environmental issues?
I think we all... Yeah, I don't... You talked about the need for us to look ahead, and I want to look ahead. I don't want to be submerged in the past. But all I would say is that the SNP can only be successful if we have broad electoral appeal anchored in the mainstream of public opinion, and that's exactly where the SNP is under my leadership.
I'm going to keep you in the past for this next question, because there was one other really interesting quote that struck me in that FT interview. She said she'd stepped in many times to stop Alex Salmond from bullying colleagues and staff. You were in the room for much of that time. Did you see her doing that? Were you aware of that behaviour? Did you ever have to do the same?
I think it's pretty well documented that Alec could be quite kind of brisk with people, and sometimes we all witnessed that, and sometimes we all had to say, look, that's not on, and that's the way it was.
Right. So you told him to cut it out as well?
Well, that's just the way it was, Mark.
OK. One last quote from her. Independence is off the radar now, she said. It'll come in our lifetimes, but it's off the radar now. Now, this is Madame de facto referendum, somebody who tried absolutely everything possible to keep independence on the radar. She says it's off. Is it?
No, I don't think it is. I think if we talk in this interview, for example, about the economic circumstances that we face, I think it's pretty clear that economic management in the United Kingdom and economic opportunity in the United Kingdom is deeply flawed and deeply weakened because of the folly of Brexit. Now, the way to sort Brexit is for Scotland to become an independent country and rejoin the European Union. That will open up economic opportunities for our country. It will crucially allow us to have an approach to migration which will actually be in our economic interests, other than the folly that's been pursued by the UK government.
But that may deliver you good results, which you take to Westminster and say, there you go, give us a referendum. And the Supreme Court have told you that's the only route, and they'll say no, because they keep saying that.
Well, we can't in a democracy have the perpetual saying of no. And I made comments last week.
We have?
Well,
for 10 years.
It's not good enough, Martin, and it can't go on, because what I set out during the week was the fact that we've now got a situation that in Northern Ireland, for example, there is an accepted means by which the constitutional status of Northern Ireland can be changed, i.e. there can be a border poll, but there's not apparently the possibility of such an opportunity for a process and a route to exist for Scotland. That's not good enough, and that's not appropriate in a democracy.
Right.
But the most important point for me, Martin, is that what I've got to do is I've got to build public support for independence, because it's only when independence becomes an overwhelmingly popular concept in Scotland that we will be able to make progress on that journey, and that's what I'm focused on.
So you're referring to a clause in the Good Friday Agreement, I think, which says, and I paraphrase here, when the Secretary of State sees evidence that suggests that the majority of the country are in favour of unification, a border poll will be held. I mean, it's there in black and white, although it's slightly, actually, opaque, that wording. Are you now going to then go to Keir Starmer and say, right, I want something in black and white that says, whatever, 3 consecutive polls over 60% and we're on?
Well, what we've got to develop is the whole discussion about what a process looks like. What is the circumstances that can lead to Scotland becoming independent?
An agreed threshold?
What we need to do is, the priority for me is to demonstrate beyond any doubt that Scotland wants to become an independent country. And that's how Scotland will become an independent country, because that's what happened with devolution.
Right.
Although we had a referendum in 1997 about devolution, it was plain to anyone's view that Scotland had decided we wanted a parliament that was powerful within the United Kingdom, and that was absolutely demonstrable. Nobody could stand in the face of that. And I need to get the independence arguments into exactly the same shape, and independence support into the same shape and that's exactly what I'm doing.
OK. You talked about eradicating child poverty. I've seen a release that came out overnight that suggests there's going to be a big speech made next week. You're going to push that agenda again. It's an agenda your party pushes routinely. Let me just ask you, we hear a lot about radical restructuring of public services. We need to completely rethink the way this country is run. We need a national conversation about the NHS. We need all that stuff. We don't see actually that much radical action. What are we going to see happen? When are we going to see cuts being made from one place so you can pour money into somewhere else? Really radical rethinking of the country's shape and form.
There's a variety of different things that we've done. So if we take the agenda on child poverty, for example, the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment, which is one of the products of the Scottish Government using the powers that we acquired after the independence referendum in 2016. The Smith Commission powers came into force in 2016. We've had the ability to improve outcomes for children and families. So there's 100,000 children being kept out of poverty as a consequence of our measures, including the Scottish Child Payment. So there's a very different outcome, an outcome that's only available in Scotland because of the actions that we've been able to take in a radical way within the Scottish Government.
Are you planning what you're going to cut to free up more money to pour into this campaign?
Well, we have to go through...
Are you planning it?
Well, we have to go through a process of preparing for every budget because we're under an obligation to live within our own resources in every budget that we bring forward. So we set out how we're going to
so should we expect cuts to enable you to afford this new push?
You're probably not surprised, Martin. I'm not really that keen to go down that language. What I'm saying is that we'll be planning to use our resources effectively and sustainably to meet the needs of people in Scotland, whether that's about eradicating child poverty or improving our public services. So when I talk about the National Health Service, what I want to make sure we're able to do is we're able to utilise our resources to improve the number of procedures that are undertaken so we can reduce waiting times. Okay. Now, we're doing that through investment in the national treatment centres. That's got to come from the resources that are available in the health budget, which Parliament's got to vote on. But it's all part of a plan to make sure that we deliver the outcomes for people in Scotland by reducing waiting times and increasing the number of procedures
but allow me to translate
forward.
for the audience what that means, and you've just said it, you don't want to talk about the language of cuts, but what that means is cuts elsewhere
it means to
enable you to afford treatment centres.
It just means that we've got to live within our resources,
exactly.
Martin, and that's exactly what we've got to do.
So what the point I was kind of gently making was that there's a lot of talk and not much action. Your detractors would say. Let me give you an example of that. The Glen Sannox ferry, and you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to rehearse the entire troubled history of these ferries. It sails for the first time tomorrow, not without its ongoing problems. One of the decks is going to be out of action. There's problems with the harbour, all that stuff. But it set sails tomorrow with passengers for the first time. There was a report that you commissioned almost 3 years ago now that said the 3 agencies that conspired to cause this effect, to mishandle, you could say, the procurement process and to be the architects of this trouble, they had to be restructured, perhaps even merged. 3 years ago. That was a serious recommendation. That hasn't happened. And last week, the Transport Secretary effectively confirmed it's going to be booted way back into the long grass till the end of this year. More talk, not enough action, right?
But what you've got to focus on is what's the outcomes coming out of this. OK, the Glen Sannox, thankfully, and regrettably from my view, far too late, will start sailing in service tomorrow. And that's very welcome, and that will help us to build resilience. The Glen Rosa will come thereafter, and we've got 4 ferries that have been procured by the self-same network of organisations that you're talking about that will be coming from a yard in Turkey.
But they need restructured or amalgamated. Why hasn't that been done? The recommendation came more than 2 years ago.
Well, precisely because restructurings are often disruptive and they can delay things and they can extend the process. It's a hard decision you've got to make. Well, it's not that hard a decision because what we've actually taken the time to concentrate on is getting the ferries procured so that we can boost the ferry services. So in the course of the next few years, there'll be 6 new large ferries coming into the CalMat network and 7 smaller ferries that are coming forward. Now, that triumvirate of organisations that you've talked about have been involved in all of the preparation for that. So the outcome that people in Scotland will achieve as a consequence of what we have done is they'll have many more new ferries in the West Coast network, and that will be to the benefit of islanders and to visitors and to the communities involved.
OK. We've talked a lot. I've got a lot still to get through. I need to gallop through some other issues, if you'll forgive me. Donald Trump, I mentioned him in the intro. Goodness knows what his arrival in the White House might bring. I think you spoke to him last week. He's talking about tariffs, big on tariffs. the US is our biggest export market for Scotch whisky. It takes 20% of our salmon. What did you say to him last week about whisky?
Well, I spoke to President Trump a few weeks ago, and it was a call at his instigation, and he was very warm and positive about Scotland. He wanted the call to express to me his enthusiasm for Scotland. And I used the call to say to President Trump there were a lot of issues that matter to us, particularly the whisky industry, because, as you rightly say, the United States is a very significant market for Scotch whisky. Now, we didn't specifically discuss tariffs because I didn't think in our initial call it was right to go into that sort of detail, because I don't know where his thinking is. What I did do, however, was express the importance that I attach to trade for the Scotch whisky industry. And I'll use that as a basis of proceeding with negotiations and discussions with President Trump, because what he also said in the call was if I ever needed a further conversation with him, he'd be very welcome to.
So you've got a channel. Is he a friend to Scotland?
Well, he's very positive about Scotland. He enthused about Scotland. He talked warmly about his mum's roots in Lewis. He talked about his pride in the business interests that he's taken forward at Turnberry and at Balmedy and the golf courses. So he's got an affinity and a warmth towards Scotland. And if that means that it helps us to avoid tariffs that might be damaging to legitimate and important, critical economic interests in Scotland, then don't be surprised if this First Minister of Scotland uses that channel to try to secure that outcome.
Right, interesting. I'm not sure you'll necessarily be as quick to break bread with his sidekick, Elon Musk. You've had quite a lot to say about him in the recent past. He seems to have taken a very sudden and a pretty extreme interest in the politics of the right. You were considering whether your government would withdraw from his social media platform, X or Twitter or whatever. Are you going to?
We've not taken any decisions about that.
Well, another decision you've delayed.
Well, actually, it's a kind of different matter, because what I'm interested in doing, I need to communicate with the wider public. So X is a platform that enables me to communicate more widely with people in Scotland. People need to hear from their First Minister. And if people in Scotland are using that network, I think there's a benefit in doing that. But we've got to be careful about social media. And I've made a point about the importance of the role and the approach that we can take with the United Kingdom government to make sure that social media acts in a responsible way within our society. And I'm troubled by quite a bit of social media activity. I've met with parents of children who've taken their own lives because of the negative effects of social media. I'll be discussing these issues at a gathering about youth violence tomorrow morning, which has been prompted by the concerns of young people. So we've got to be clear that we get the regulation about social media giants correct to protect people in our society.
Right. I mean, Ian Russell, the father of Molly Russell, has written to the Prime Minister saying he's not doing enough. You've spoken in the past about your concerns. You've talked about increasing the minimum age for using social media to 16. If the Prime Minister doesn't do anything about this, will you step in? Will Scotland go it alone?
Well, some of these points are regulated by the United Kingdom government. We don't have the power to do it.
Let me just jump in there. There's one example springs to mind, right? You minimum unit pricing. On the face of it, you didn't have the power to do it, but you made it a health issue. So then you did change. So what is this if it's not absolutely front and centre? Young people are taking their own lives. This is a health issue. Okay. You could do something about this.
Okay, well, let me take that away, Martin. It's a different way of looking at the question, because I am keen to take action. I don't want in any way from this interview to be taken that I'm dissatisfied with our engagement with the UK government in this question. We've had perfectly good discussions with the UK government, and indeed Ofcom have taken action, which I warmly welcome as part of this process.
Fiercely criticised by Ian Russell, who says it doesn't go nearly far enough.
Well, and I agree with Mr Russell. I think we've got to do more, but we're taking that discussion forward with the UK government, constructively with Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State. And what we'll... But you put to me a fair point, which is there more that we could do within Scotland by looking at this through different lines? And I'll look at that question, because I think it's an important question that we leave no stone unturned in addressing the issues of concern.
So you will consider changing the way we
I'll have a look at that to see if there are ways in which it can be done. But crucially, I also want to give the very clear signal that we are working cooperatively with the UK government on taking forward this agenda.
OK, that is clear and that is understood. Let me ask you lastly about the economy. Rachel Reeves in China at the moment, breaking bread. Firstly, should she be there? Should she come back, either to sort this out or because she shouldn't be in China in the first place?
I think she's got to engage with China on economic issues. China's a huge economy and there are significant issues involved. We've got to proceed with care and with caution, and I expressed in First Minister's questions on Thursday just some of the caution that's got to be exercised in some areas, particularly on the example that has been put to me by the Conservative member Liz Smith was about surveillance cameras. So we've got to take care on some of these questions. But in principle, I think the engagement with China is important, and we engage with China on some significant investments around particularly offshore renewable technologies.
Right, the cost of borrowing is going through the roof for governments at the moment. Rachel Reeves probably will want to do less of that, which means she's going to have to find money from somewhere. She's promised not to put taxes up, which means she may well be looking around the cabinet table with her cutlass out, looking to make cuts in various departments, which would have an impact on you. Are you worried about cuts coming down the line?
I am worried about it now. I think we got to a better budget settlement, which I've made clear was welcome. But I think one of the problems I think the UK government has is that they've made a fundamental mistake about the contents of the budget. They signalled, and I agree with this, the importance of supporting and encouraging growth within the economy, but then they took a budget measure on increasing the employers' national insurance contributions, which is really damaging for economic growth. So when I was earning my spurs years and years ago politically, employers' national insurance contributions was called a tax on jobs. And they've just increased the tax on jobs. Now, I'm really worried, and the companies I talked to in Scotland, small companies, medium companies, large companies, are all looking again at their headcount because of the cost of employment. That's before we get anywhere near the public sector and the third sector and the implications of all of these issues. So a really big fundamental mistake was made in the budget about increasing employers' national insurance contributions. Now, we will have discussed my demand for there to be more investment in public services and public finances. So what the UK government should have done, what I urged them to do, was to increase income tax. We did it in Scotland. It's the fairest and most effective way to deal with it, so you can invest in your public services.
Well, look, we will have the UK government on in the next week or two, I hope, to answer some of that. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for being with us on the Sunday show. First Minister John Swinney, thank you.